Hello, 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 everyone. It's Dr. Tamara Beckford, and welcome to the Dr. Tamara Beckford Show. Okay, for of you guys who are in the medical profession, we have a treat for you today. We're going to go over 5 ways of fulfillment that you need to know, especially as a medical professional. And I'm going to bring on our guest today who's going to help us with that. Alrighty, so this lovely doc of ours, he's a graduate of Lake Erie College of Osteopathic Medicine, affectionately called LECOM. Alrighty. He did his residency in family medicine at Sampson Regional Medical Center in Clinton, North Carolina. He has focused on non-pharmaceutical modalities to achieve an optimal health and functional freedom. He's also a course director at LECOM, teaching medical education along with family medicine. He's also a chief learning officer for the medical education for this company, ReelDx. So you might have seen him out there. Why? Because he's a keynote speaker and has presented at universities across the United States. He has spoken also at national conferences. This lovely doc of ours was born and raised for 19 years in Saudi Arabia, and he has a great passion for the country. As a result, he's also been authored and many articles for their Family Medicine Essential Guide. He currently living here in Kentucky in the United States. I'm talking about the one and only Dr. Christopher Behringer. A round of applause. Yes, with are you, Dr. Behringer?
I'm doing absolutely fantastic.
Love it, love it, love it. Alrighty. So many things about fulfillment. And that's one of those things that in life, unfortunately, especially for those of us who go towards these long journey um careers, it takes a while to get there. You're always looking for that fulfillment. But before we dig into that, we want to know a little bit more about you. All right.
Mhm.
So, Dr. Behringer, tell us, when did you decide that you wanted to become a doctor?
Okay, so this is a two-part answer, actually. So I break this down into two questions. One
Mhm.
is, when did you decide to go to medical school? And then when did you decide you wanted to be a doctor? So yes. So I decided I wanted to go into medical school when my aspirations in a music career were not going to be financially stable.
Okay,
Um,
so wait, you cannot just drop that on us and then just leave us. So the
yeah. I was primarily a bassist, and I was in Orlando, and I actually helped run a club. It was called the Unsigned Club at University of Central Florida, and we would network musicians together into bands, and we would have them perform at university events, local festivals, things like that. Through that, I've had the opportunity to do things like I was play on the Grammy soundstage. I've played at the Playboy Mansion, played on stage with people like Joe Perry and other things like this when I was playing.
I love it. Alrighty, so you're like, okay, dun-dun-dun-dun-dun. All right. And then when do we move from that to, okay, I'm going to open up Grey's Anatomy and Netta?
It was a double major microbiology and biotechnology undergrad because most people in the music industry, you don't it's debatable whether you need an actual formal music education to get a lot of that work, at least as a 4-year degree.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was in that instead, and I just had the grades, and the music stuff wasn't it was good, but it wasn't popping off in the stability side that would have been nice. And also, as people I have a mother from Southeast Asia, and there are sometimes cultural and family pressures to push people into the STEM field. And so I applied to medical school because, quite frankly, I had the grades and it seemed more of a stable future, which is
Mm-hmm.
probably not the story most people expect to hear. It's just like, I did it because it was stable. Now, when I decided to be a doctor was actually around my second and third year of medical school. Yeah. And so what
How does
happened
that
was
change? Yes, yes.
Yeah, so what happened there was I helped start the OMM or the OMT TA program at my medical school. It's still running to this day, but I've started realizing that at least with the students, I could take a normally like boring topic or like an overwhelming topic for people and break it down into digestible bits while using my performing background to try to make it somewhat a little enjoyable.
Mhm.
When I started getting into the clinical world, I realized that with my patients, especially on the inpatient side, they don't want to be there. Like, patients don't want to. Most of the time, patients do not want to come to the hospital or to the clinic. And as a trainee, I had very little input on the actual practical application of the treatment plan. So I figured, what can I bring for this patient's actual healing and well being? And again, it fell back on my performing background. I could make these people laugh, smile. I could make them feel comforted. I could have them cry, right? Like, and give them that performance that they needed in that moment. And it was at that moment I realized that, oh, I'm falling in love with this for the same reasons I liked medicine. That I liked music. And that kind of came into the crux of what I tell people is I don't want to be a doctor, but I get to do, but being a doctor allows me to do everything that I want in the most fulfilling, impactful way. And at this point, I would not go back to music. I am fully fulfilled in what I do, how I like it. And I see it honestly as just an extension of who I am. And it's just the same reasons I'm a doctor are the same reasons I like music.
Wow. Of course, this is the first interview. And by the way, you are my 269th interview doctor that I've interviewed. And I have never in this path through music and the love and the passion that way. We've all had passions for things that are outside of clinical medicine, but being able to find life, like you said, that fulfillment is just amazing. Now, when you got into med school and you
Mhm.
were starting this club, there are a lot of specialties, but you chose family medicine. So, what about family medicine that drew you? And especially since you're like, okay, I'm finding fulfillment here. What about family medicine that drew you and allowed you to say, "Oh, wow, I can combine these 2 passion, this passion of music that I truly have and love, this passion of medicine that, whoa, it's that I didn't know about you,
Mhm.
and then now I can merge them together."
Yeah.
Tell us, what made you decide to do family medicine?
So again, I'll probably answer this question in the same way of I'll start with a very kind of practical, maybe not motivational way, but family medicine's very flexible. It's you can do ER, inpatient, outpatient, you can do OB, you can do gyn. So it's very flexible. And that allowed me to tailor it to the way that I could express myself. I do believe that it's called the art of medicine. And I think we should approach it as an art form that has many
Mhm,
forms of expression. And family medicine for me allowed that. Now, getting into it, one reason I really liked music was because of what it could do for people when they're at their lowest,
mm,
really make them feel better. I remember I was at a performance and there were people like Lita Ford from the Runaways and was there. And there were other people like Phil Susan, he'd played with Ozzy Osbourne, and there were some other people at this thing. And there's a guy who came up and said, I was having the most terrible day. And then here's Lita Ford playing Kiss Me Deadly. Like this made my day. And what happened is when I was in family medicine, I was able to form these like long-term relationships with people where I got to really treat the human aspect of medicine.
mhm,
And what I mean by that, so I tell my students this and I'll explain it, is some of them will get a little discouraged when they say family medicine is not really a specialty. And I tell them family medicine is the specialty of making medicine livable. That's the
mm,
way I put it. So let me give the example. You get a patient and you need them to get a diagnostic testing, but they need transportation to get there because they don't have their own vehicle. Who fills out the transportation form? Me,
mhm,
family med. You send them to a specialist and you don't know what's going on, and they run their regular panel and they say, I don't know what's going on. What did they say? Follow up with PCP.
mhm,
Go to a surgeon or another specialist and they recommend a procedure. They have questions about the procedure. Who do they talk to first? Usually family medicine. And it's up to us to make that experience of medicine livable for them. They come to us in that confidence and in that trust. To be quite frank, medicine to an extent is we have evidence-based medicine. So the practical application of medicine can sometimes, not all the time, obviously, this is reductive, but if you can get it right most of the time if you look up on up to date,
it's
right?
right.
Yeah, look up on up to date. You're not going to get it wrong generally. But the question is how do you make this person feel comfortable, confident,
Mhm.
happy? That
It's the
visit,
art.
that visit is 15 minutes, but they have to live with that 15 minutes for the next month, 3 months, or 6 months. How do you allow them that confidence that they do feel like they're being taken care of? And that's the family medicine physician's job. We make medicine livable.
Absolutely. And there's, as you mentioned, that art and being able to put both of it together. The science of medicine is there. When the patient comes to you as a doctor, they can look up some of the things too, but are they able to get that quality connection, understanding, appreciation, reassurance? That's where we come in, where you
Mhm.
look up these numbers and it's red. But if you look at the point one above the and does that point one mean? Or this is a big thing that we get in medicine. I used to be on this antibiotic and it was or this blood pressure medicine and it was 5 milligrams. But then now they have me on this other one and it is 100 milligrams. And it's so different. But then what do you do? Because in that person's mind, I just went from a 5 to 100, but that other medication might start at 100. It might be the lowest dose. So that's our opportunity to connect with the patient for the reassurance, to
Yep.
give the little bit of tip, right? And that's, as you mentioned, is part of the art of this whole process. Alrighty. So now you mentioned that you found fulfillment. Now, one of our premise today is 5 ways. For the rest of us, since you got it, Dr. You give us 5 tips for fulfillment, especially those of us who are in the medical profession.
Absolutely. So this is actually an exercise I give my students and other people, and I
Mm.
try to encourage you people to find their own 5 ways to fulfillment. So these aren't. I'm not going to tell you 5 ways. I'm going to find. We're going to find 5 ways together. And yep, and this is predicated on the notion that no one is so dumb they could only be a doctor. We are
Multifaceted human beings.
we are anyone who is capable of being a doctor is capable of applying that intelligence and dedication to something else that is probably just as financially stable and significantly less stressful and litigious. But we have chosen this because
Mhm.
just think about residency, right? If you told me I I busk on the New York subway 80 hours a week to make minimum wage, you would be like, you should get a different job. But that's residency. Like, but we don't tell them to get a different job. But we do this for passion. We do it because we love it. We do it because we can't see ourselves contributing any other way to the world. And one thing that is starting to become more and more common, especially in the students that I teach, is they are looking for well-rounded students. And this is also true in other generations. Is for them to get into medical school, they have to volunteer, they have to research, to get into residency, they have to publish, they have to do this. And then when they get into the clinical world, the vast majority of the time, it's go see patients, end
Charts,
sentence.
charts.
Yeah, chart, done. And these students have learned to love other things, volunteer, research, publish, volunteer work, all these other things. They've learned to love these other things and now they have no outlet. And it's very easy to look at medicine as a purely clinical pursuit. And so I give people this exercise called What Are Your 5 Ways to Fulfillment? And it's basically what are 5 different ways you can see yourself being a doctor that is not clinically like an application. So you can look at teaching, research, product design, advocacy. You can get out there and talk for underserved populations. And what you're trying to do with this is figure out what are these different skill sets that I have that could be applied somewhere else. But just like me, I feel more fulfilled in medicine so that we turn our job as doctors as a choice and not a financial obligation because we have a $250,000 in debt.
We're honest. So for refreshing.
That's essentially it. It's trying to figure out, okay, I'll give you an example. I have a student who really likes graphic design. Okay. And they could not conceive of a way of using their graphic design skills in a medical application. And I was talking to them and I said, aren't you already making
Right.
graphic design products and like flyers for the medical school club that you're in? And she's like, yeah, I'm doing that. And I said, have you ever thought about interacting with the local health department to make bilingual posters since you also speak a second language for any kind of healthcare outreach events. And she's, no, but I'm going to now. And that gets you into the system of outreach, right? That gets you into the system so that when you're in medical school, you can stay in touch with different healthcare departments. You build that experience. And over time, you learn how not just to advertise, but start to run these events and how to organize these events and how to make it more effective. And you learn marketing skills and you realize you're able to apply these in a medical aspect. A lot of the skills that I learned in medicine apply to classroom and both the classroom setting as well as into healthcare outreach. How do I get bums on seats? How do I make a poster? How do I make a flyer? How do I um,
How
make
do you
sure
get
that
the
there's
buy-in, right?
yeah, how do you define? How do you make sure there's good inflow outflow of the audience? How do you make sure that there's a smooth transition? Because I don't know if you've ever tried to organize musicians on a tight set schedule, but it's hurting cats, honestly.
It's like the kid is trying to get it. But I love that you were able to bring to light for this particular student something that in that point in time, he or she would not realize that this skill set is just like, well, that's mind blowing because they only see it as I am just a lonely med
Yeah,
student and I am doing this. But stepping back and looking from an eagle's eye view, right? One of the things that I think so fascinating is this person that had this great artistic ability. And it's just, I don't know what I'll be able to do with that ability. But all of our net Netter has flashcards. Netter has like
Mhm.
what? And has the same skills as the person whose book she's looking at had memorized from. And it's just really highlighting and bringing to light to someone who's just never thought about it that way, which is so important. And it's great of you to be able to help to highlight them to the something that
Yeah,
they've never thought about. And it's just like these skills are innate to you. Plus, this is probably something that brings her so much joy to just sit and free draw and bring in all of these to create and use that other part of her brain and just release all these hormones that makes her relax and all of that. And these are ways that you made her realize that something that she loves to do, you can use all the skills that you're using to do that to market yourself to do additional things in medicine. And you're still having impact.
absolutely. I did that. I do this exercise with my students with their personal statements, which is when you do your personal statement to either medical school or to residency, when you talk about what do I see myself, how I see myself being a doctor, I need a close-ended event that relates to your passion. So another student that I had, he's decided to go to medical school after being in a bad vehicular collision, and the ER physician saved him and his friends' lives.
Mhm.
And he went on to start the AMSA chapter at the local university here. And he really liked that leadership event organization thing. And we talked about how to improve his personal statement. And we settled in on, hey, something I would really like to do as a doctor one day, or even as a medical student, is to help teach basic first aid or CPR or BLS at the DMV for new drivers. And
Mm,
that right there combines his story as to why he got into it. It combines his event organization skills and it combines a medical application outreach.
absolutely. Absolutely. And that is another fulfilling activity that drives the passion, especially during the times when the thing about when you're on a journey, something similar to medicine, and we're just going to be honest, it's arduous. It requires a lot of sitting and studying. Sometimes you start questioning yourself, what?
Yeah,
But when you have that outlet, that fulfillment, it helps along that journey. And you see the application of what you're doing outside of this microcosm of my book or my rotation.
I bring this up with my students a lot about you need to do this 5 ways to fulfillment as early as possible because there are generally only 2 times that people actually sit down and put to paper or genuinely think about why do I want to be a doctor. And one is when you write your personal statement, that's usually the first time you actually sit down and put it to paper and really think about it for a while. And unfortunately, the personal statement is by its nature inherently disingenuous. It's not a blatant lie, but it's exaggerated, obviously, right? And then the other time is I'm burnt out. Why the heck am I here? And neither of those are good ways of actually forming a solid foundation.
Absolutely, absolutely. Doing it during a time where you can truly see and bring to light the passion that you have and to read this. Sometimes for some people, they're discovering it. For others, they are rediscovering their passion. I love it. I love it. Alrighty. So another tip that to help us to draw in those passion that you want us to know, because like you said, my personal statement, med school was quite a few years ago, and sitting down and trying to figure out what do I want out of life. A lot of people, they've been working for a while, and it's not until it just that they're burned out that they're just like, what is it that I truly want? But we're trying to get you before you got to that stage. So
Absolutely.
what's another question or tip that we said we can really highlight for those?
I've got two, and I'll
Mhm.
touch on one and then the other. One is rewrite your personal statement. I don't care if you're 20 years into your career, write a
Mm.
personal statement. And there's a way I want you to write the personal statement. This is how I recommend people write it. Most people will write their personal statement in what I call order of events, which
Mhm.
is something like, I hate to say this, but as someone who has read hundreds of personal statements, it becomes a drinking game to an extent of, is there a dead or dying family member in the first paragraph? Which is not
To
to,
diminish or
denigrate
yeah.
that. Yeah, it does not diminish that. However, it will usually read something like this: Grandma was sick and passed away when I was 8 years old, and that made me want to be a doctor. And now I'm volunteering when I'm 20, and this makes me want to be a doctor. And it's like, where did those 12 years go?
Mm.
Right? And many students and many people who may have written their personal statement may find difficulty in connecting those events. I don't know how these connect. And the reason is because they don't. People are like, I wanted to be a doctor since I was 8 years old. You never really wanted to be a cowboy? Come on. Right. But I tell people, let's actually write this in terms of order of motivation. And that's
Mm.
what I talk to people about is you probably came to the cognitive final decision to be a doctor recently of applying to medical school, right? Within the last year or so. And what you've done is you've retrospectively looked at previous events and supported that decision. So what I tell people is your first paragraph is tell me who you are as a person without mentioning medicine at all. Your second paragraph should be what are you doing right now that's using that character trait you just explained? What are you doing right now for that? Then the third paragraph is actually tell me something about your past that supports your present.
Mm.
It's a lot easier to do that where you can say something like, I really like organizing events because I'm doing these sorts of things. The reason I'm doing that is because I was in a vehicular collision in the past. Rather than saying, I sat on this vehicular collision for 3 years before actually doing anything. You're building it up. And then the last paragraph is always, what is something that is close ended that you want to achieve that relates everything to it?
Absolutely. Having the thought of I'll just be honest, the thought when you said to rewrite a personal statement, my heart sunk initially. But as you went through the style and the technique of really bringing in who you are, not what it is that you do or want to do, but your start. So the what you have done is really had that person bring out the person, the inner person, and then connect it to the why they want to, as opposed to the I've always wanted to, and this is the why. Now, who are you in the core? What are some things that are natural or things that you love to do and you're good at them? And how does that relate and bring you along this path? I love it. I love it. I love it. All right.
There's, yeah,
Yep.
there's one more thing I was going to
Hmm.
say, and this is probably going to go counter to most advice that you hear nowadays. But I disagree very heavily with with the, I don't disagree with work life balance. I disagree with the narrative of work life balance or how it's kind of placed onto physicians. The majority of work life balance workshops and knowledge are coming from people who don't get asked by their patient to look at a rash in the Walmart aisle.
Correct. Hey, Doc, while you're here,
Can you see what I'm why I don't care if you want I hate to say this. I don't care if you want work-life balance. If something goes on a plane, they're gonna ask for a doctor, and if you see your patients out in the community, they treat you like a 5th grader treats a teacher. You're not allowed to be here because 'cause you're
Yes.
a doctor.
Yeah.
You can want work-life balance all you want. Society won't let you. And to an extent, you probably knew that going into this, that you are to an extent on a moral and ethical pillar. And to resent that is at some point and say, I really desire my work-life balance. I'm not a doctor when I come home. I I think that leads to cognitive dissonance. I really do think that leads to some level of dissonance because how can you not be something that you dedicated minimum 11 years of your life for, right? 4 years undergrad, 4 years medical school, minimum 3-year residency. How could you
Mhm.
not, how could that not be an inextricable part of you? And so I tell people again, you just have to accept at some level, you have society will always see you as a doctor. You are a doctor 24/7. You effectively have very little work-life balance. Now, that does not necessarily mean your employment is your life. I don't mean that. What I mean is, again, going back to similar things with my music career, is that the very same reason that I like to go into the clinic and spend time with my patients is the very same reason I sit on the drum kit back here and play my bass and also teach. I get to perform for people. I get to, I like research. I like writing. I took a lot of AP literature courses and I writing classes and things. I like writing. So I like doing research papers, and I like raising the next generation. So I work with a lot of 3rd and 4th years on their first publications. And these I don't see these as just work as a doctor. I see these as different expressions of the same art. Just like how sometimes a bassist or like a instrumentalist will sometimes have to put down their instrument for a couple days and just because I'm burnt out on this.
Mhm.
They're not burnt out on music. They're burnt out on the specific expression of the art.
Mm.
And it's opening up that pathway for people to say, I'm a little burnt out on clinical medicine. And people are already doing this. I'm burnt out on clinical medicine, so I'm going to go to an academic position. You've in your subconscious accepted that you are just that you don't you haven't fallen out of love of medicine. You've just fallen out of love with a particular expression of that medicine. You want to recapture some level of the love that you have. And it's now about, and so what I'm trying to get people to do is be aware and cognitive of that now and to be preemptive about that because you've got all sorts of stats being reported, right? Almost 50% of all doctors report burnout.
Mhm.
50% of doctors report wanting to leave clinical medicine or their current employment within the next 2 years. 70% of new grad residents are going to leave their employment within the first 5 years after they graduated residency. What are the reasons? Why? And if you're more aware of who you are, you can stay ahead of it. You can say, okay, I'm probably going to get burnt out in a year if I keep doing X.
Absolutely. There are some facets that you mentioned about the burnout, and
Mhm.
for those who are in medicine and reaching at that point. I recall being at a session for other high achievers, and these were PhDs. And someone mentioned versus work-life balance. He says, I prefer calling it the work-life harmony. You being a musician, you should probably and I said, I listened and I'm like, I'd love to hear more. And what the connotation was is that you'll never truly have 50-50. You'll always have a change in the percentage of either the work and the life. Sometimes, and it's just for one to recognize that. Now, knowing, as you mentioned, being a physician, once you have attained the title, you pro yeah, you are a physician.
Your stuff.
Yeah, you are stuck. And yeah, and wherever you go. And I know I've responded to the in-flight and taken care of the sweet little old lady. And as an ER doctor, I can assess a lot of these things quickly without as soon as I'm looking, I'm assessing. Did she need the big treatment? No. But what she needed at that point in time, which I was able to give her, is some of the what we talked about. The art of medicine, which is the art of reassurance that, okay, things will be fine despite whatever it is that was going on after, of course, I finished assessing. Did I go on that flight thinking that I was going to be a doctor? I'm that doctor that says that I am not a doctor right now. But when they kept going, and I'm like, okay, obviously they need something. Well,
Yeah.
yeah. So I am that doctor that says that I'm off duty, but am I truly off duty? I'm also the person that look at, and I love the geriatric population. I've always done. So I'm the person who was looking and reaching out for that person who looks like they're about to fall because I see and I know the next steps.
Yep.
So you're right. I'm a doctor.
Yep. And work-life balance also has an interesting connotation to it, where a lot of work-life balance, the way people say, "Oh, you need to balance yourself," is to actually step away from your work. And that implies that your work is, by its nature, draining and to an extent negative, right? You need to step away from it. And that leads to a dissonance again in our brains of, but it's service to other people. Like being a doctor, it's unique. Like I can understand where other jobs might have that, like you can step away and take like a 10-minute yoga session and like your job is draining and stuff. But sometimes we can't step away for 10 minutes because we're intubating someone. But also it does lead to this kind of predication that your work is by its nature draining and negative, and you must recharge it with something that's positive. And that leads to an extent resenting medicine because you start viewing it through this lens of, for me to be a healthy human being, I must step away from medicine,
Hmm.
as opposed to I must step away from this expression of medicine for the moment for myself.
What are your thoughts on the external? Because we know burnout in medicine is multifactorial. I think most clinicians do not want to step away because they don't want to practice medicine. Most clinicians are stepping away because the external
Yeah.
factors that's preventing them from doing the art of medicine.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So this is what I tell my students and other people is that we get into those situations of being burnt out by a lot of those things because we care about the clinical world so much that you forget that a single patient visit adds on about an extra 30% of work just on the back end in terms of paperwork at least, right? And it's very easy that over the first couple years of entering into a new practice that you slowly keep adding on work as you get more efficient, thinking this is what I'm supposed to do. And so what I tell people is, hey, you need to look at certain work study, like studies on work efficiency. Most studies would say human beings can only be efficient for about 5 to 6 hours in a day.
Mm.
So how do you balance that? Set up your patient's schedule to do that. Are you going to potentially make a little less money in the clinical aspect? Probably. You might not, honestly. What I'm trying to get at is there's going to be BS. There's going to be garbage you don't want to do, but if you want to have that clinical aspect, you minimize it. You try your best to minimize it preemptively. You just don't accept the extra work. You don't let your patient panel get any bigger. You don't go above your schedule, and you take that time to do other things. You have to be protective. For me, when I was getting ready to go into my first job, I had already started teaching with LECOM and as well as one of these medical education companies. And that way, when they hired me, they knew I had these other obligations. And so I set up my schedule and said, this is what it's got to be because I do these other things. And you hired me partially because of the qualities that I have, which include these things. So yeah, I figured out, at least from a family medicine perspective, average patient visits about 15 minutes. I want about an hour of admin time in my day. So 15 minutes times 5 hours thereabouts is 20 patients. Take away two patients for 30-ish minutes, maybe a little bit of lunch or here or there for paperwork. 18 patients a day.
Wow.
That's how I am not above the average. I do a lot of research in anthropologic studies of what are just the base human patterns of efficiency and work. I am not better than that, or I can't assume I'm better than them, right?
Better than that?
No, not because again, it's an average. I might be a little bit better at certain things, and I'm sure there's a lot of people here who are like, "Oh, I can work 10 straight hours." Okay. But again, it's an average. You average out over the week. Yes, people can work more hours as long as they work more hours less days. That is
Yeah.
also true. But I'm in a clinical setting where I'm there 4 or 5 days a week, and so I need to be protective of those, particular hours.
Mm.
That is something I tell people is one way to at least protect yourself from burnout or even try to remove that burnout from things like the documentation, the administrative is you have to understand where that's coming from. That's coming from the acceptance of more patient care. And yes, I accept that it's a double-edged sword because you are seeing less patients get care. But if you burn out in 5 years, that's 2,000 some odd patients not getting care, as opposed to you seeing maybe 1,500 patients for 20 years. You got to play the numbers.
Mhm. So you approach it from a standpoint of longevity. How can you stay in this position to be available for the long run versus stacking up and then not being available at all
Correct.
within a shorter period of time? Now, with that, have you ever experienced burnout? Because you are ebbing and
Right.
flowing, you're doing all the things, you've recognized a lot of these terms and also skill sets for fulfillment. Was there a period of time that you got burned out and then reflectively saying, "Whoa, I am not doing the things that I know should"? Or is it that in recognizing that you've now developed and using on these skills and showing it to others?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of one that's earlier because I have a very recent one where I can express some level of burnout.
Mhm.
I'll start with that. Why not? It's the closest to home. I quit my job a couple days ago.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's the main reason that happened was there was a potential grant for a research project that would have aided volunteer firefighters.
Mhm.
And there were disagreements as to whether that I should be taken out of the clinic and pulled off of full production model and just salaried to do administrative tasks for this work. And the consensus was to not take me out of the clinic, and thus the grant was lost and no one else is taking it. And so there's no community outreach for the volunteer firefighters. At that point, I actually had a moral disagreement.
Mhm.
I had a strong, firm moral disagreement. And then shortly after that, I had a personal thing happen in my life with with one of my parents in a health crisis. And that led me to making a snap decision at that time of I have to get out of here because one, I need to take care of my family.
Mhm.
And because I'm my father's primary caregiver.
Mhm.
And I then retroactively supported it, just like with the personal statement. I retroactively supported it with these other things that were happening in the very recent past of, am I really being true to myself fully here? Did I do fine with my patients? Probably. I'm not going to toot a horn or anything like that.
Mhm.
But I could not jihad with this. I was getting something was getting in the way of me doing good. And that very much rubbed me the wrong way. And so now I'm actually taking a few months off while I'm job hunting and such, and I'm pursuing an MBA program
Mm.
currently and doing a lot of these interviews to get I now have the time to get my word out there, my voice out there, and to talk with people. And I'm getting an MBA so that I now have authority to talk with the people who made the decisions that I felt got in the way of me doing good. I can now have authority and credentials to be in that position to be the person who can do a force for good because I believe in something called the moral mission of medicine. I legitimately think if I wanted to just sit around and make money, I'd go do something else. I'm here because of the good I can do in the world.
Oh, I love it. The moral mission of medicine. That's something that's innate in all of us going into medical school and a part of us. And when you
Mm,
talk about burnout, some people talk about it as a moral injury. And based on what you described as part of the decision making for you recently, it is part of not being able to adhere to that moral portion of you, right? Which is what is it that at the core made me want to give up 11 or so years, and it's to do this moral good for the world, to leave with an impact that is better than when I came in?
Yep. For me, I knew a lot of these stats and things like that going into my job coming out of residency. And so I was luckily not burnt out by things like the paperwork or the administrative tasks because I had structured it very well. I had a clean inbox at the end of every day. I was going home on time. I still got an hour for lunch, cruising on that aspect. And that meant I could focus purely on like delivering patient care. And when I got a moral injury, I could stand firm on that.
Mhm.
And that could be like the sole reason, and that could be very good for me. And so that's something I tell other people is protect your time so that you can have things that are important for you in work and focus on them.
Love it, love it. Alrighty. So now with this is now taking me to my fun question
Yeah.
of the day, which I told you about. All right. But now I have to really think about it. You blurred out all these instruments in the background so I can't see them. But you know me, you're still not gonna be able to be a bass. You're still not gonna be able to play drums. If you weren't able to be a doctor, you're not able to be a writer, teach medical students, mentor med students. What else do we talk about? Anything else? Alrighty. Okay. Well, what would
I
you
might cheat a little bit on this just because practically when I was doing music, I knew I probably wasn't going to make my money being a performer. I would probably have ended up doing tour and concert production. That is most likely what I probably would have ended up and where I could probably see myself having a lot of fulfillment still because I could still do things for people, still be out there in the community, platform musicians who don't have opportunities, bring people in on concerts where tickets for most concerts are super expensive. Can we put on like a charity one or like a free festival? I could still apply a lot of my passions in that capacity. I could still teach music or I could mentor someone who wants to get into the music industry. Um, and it's a more stable job, right? It's an actual job.
This is from my utopia. I meant to tell you that part. So this is about the job in my head. We're all my friends. Now you become my friend. That's how it is, Chris. Are in my head, and we have like this beautiful utopia. So you are putting on the concert. Oh yeah, I was a backup dancer. I didn't even tell you that's what I was doing. So now, really,
So was my aunt. My aunt was one of the backup dancers for Tina Turner in the 80s and 90s.
ooh, mine was just in my head.
Oh, I thought you were actually a backup dancer. I'm so sorry.
Now I'm like, ooh, we have a real backup dancer. I love it. I love it. With this has been a great conversation. And you're right. You have really helped us to tap into some of the core of what makes us who we are. I love the question or the statement that you said, rewrite your personal statement from where you are right now as these 20 or 30 or whatever PGY you are. But do it from the core and start it backwards. Really thinking about, and then also some of the question, the for those who are probably going into medicine with the typical, since I was 5 years old. I love the way that you were able to help to frame their personal statements. For those of us who are a little bit PGY many years out, framing a personal statement too from that standpoint, recognizing the additional talent. And this is something I talk about it, and I've been blessed to be able to do this, which is recognizing what else am I good at other than medicine and tapping into that. And that's also a huge factor in fulfillment, especially when you're in this profession that takes a lot from you. Just like you mentioned, you're a doctor no matter where you go. You might not be physically wearing the white coat, but it's still on no matter where.
Here are we, you and me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Alrighty. So there are many people who are listening to this wonderful conversation, Dr. Behringer, and they're like, oh my gosh, you know what? I love him. I love his mindset. You love to write. I'd love to see where is he next? Where is he writing? Where can I connect with this doctor? Where can I find him on social media? Do you mind letting them know?
Yeah, the best place is actually on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
My LinkedIn profile is probably the best place because I actually have written articles such as if you want again a summary of my personal statement writing guide, it's on there because I have it there for my residents and medical students to just share. I was sick of engaging in logoria every single time they ask me a question. Now I'm just like, here you go. And there you'll also see links to other things that I have. Like when I publish had an article that was written in the DO, which is the AOA journal, AOA kind of um, journal, just that has specialty topics and stuff. I talked about a very similar topic
Mhm.
there. I share a lot of the stuff, a lot of my publications and stuff like that there. So LinkedIn is probably the best place to get a hold of me.
Love it, love it, love it. With that, we're going to end this wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Dr. Behringer. This was excellent, excellent, excellent. But you know what? There's some people who are jumping on and they're like, oh my gosh, there we go. I only caught the last part of the conversation and there was so much juice. And I'm like, have no fear. This wonderful conversation will be available on our Your Caring Docs website. Is URCARINGDOCS.com. Select podcast. You'll see Dr. Behringer's handsome face right there, right? Just click and you'll be able to download this episode. Send this to 10 of your friends, 10 people who are possibly wanting to go to medical school that will be able to help them write that wonderful personal statement and also to keep them in mind what are some ways for them to keep fulfilled throughout this medical journey. With that, we're going to end this wonderful conversation. I'm Dr. Tamara Beckford. I am your burnout guide. So if you are suffering from burnout, please do not hesitate to reach out to me, right? So especially if you're a high achieving woman and you're suffering from burnout. So yourcaringdocs.com/thrive, and I'll be happy to support you. Thank you so much, Dr. Behringer. With that, we're going to end this wonderful conversation. You guys, take care. Bye bye.